Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to take a closer look at the state of the US and global markets, specifically with all this stuff going on with Trump and the whole trade war thing.
Yeah, tariffs, retaliation, volatility.
Exactly. You sent this in because you're really trying to get a handle on what's causing all the ups and downs. We're going to break it all down for you. So, we've got a recent report here. It really dives deep into how the market is reacting to all of Trump's trade moves and what some experts think this means, for the economy going forward. Right off the bat, the report talks about how crazy things got on Wall Street. It sounds like, yeah, things got kind of nuts with the markets opening way down because of this whole trade war. But it wasn't just a straight drop, was it?
No, not at all. In fact, it's pretty remarkable how volatile things were. The report highlights that the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped something like 700 points initially.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty big drop. But then, get this, it actually swung all the way back and went up over 800 points at one point.
Wait, so it went from down 700 to up 800 in the same day?
The same day. That kind of swing is just wild. It really shows you just how sensitive the market is to every little bit of news about trade.
Talk about a roller coaster. So, what explains that crazy jump back into positive territory?
Well, the report attributes it to a rumor, and not even confirmed one. It calls it an unfounded rumor about the possibility of a 90-day pause on the tariffs.
So, just the hint of a potential break, even if it wasn't true, was enough to send things soaring.
Right, that's exactly it. And I think that says a lot about how desperate people are for some stability, some predictability. When even a baseless rumor can cause that kind of swing, it tells you there's not a lot of confidence in the current approach.
Yeah, grasping at straws, almost. But I'm guessing that optimism didn't last.
Nope. The report says as soon as that rumor was debunked, the market took a nosedive, pretty much retracing all those gains and then some. And it wasn't just limited to the US either.
Oh, so this was a global freakout.
Absolutely, it was global. European markets, they were down all day long. Red arrows all day is how the report puts it.
Well,
And over in Asia, their markets had already closed sharply down earlier. So this was not just a Wall Street problem. This was a global anxiety attack over trade.
right. Yeah, that interconnectedness, everything's tied together now. And then you've got President Trump in the middle of all this, and he's telling everyone to, and I quote, not be weak or stupid and panic.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Because on the one hand, he's saying don't panic, but on the other, he's doubling down on his position. The report specifically mentions that he's actually threatening to slap even more tariffs on China, like 50% tariff
50%. That's huge. Why is he doing that?
retaliation. The report explains that this was a direct response to China imposing their own retaliatory tariffs the week before, around 34%.
Mm.
Basically, China put tariffs on U.S. goods because the U.S. put tariffs on Chinese goods.
Okay, so it's like a back and forth and escalating trade war.
Exactly. It's a classic tit for tat. And meanwhile, the White House is downplaying any economic concerns.
What are they saying exactly?
The report has a couple of quotes from administration officials, things like, the market will find a bottom, it will be soon, and there doesn't have to be a recession. Very optimistic, very reassuring.
But not everyone shares that optimism, right?
No, not at all. The report contrasts those statements with the opinions of a lot of financial experts. Specifically, most Wall Street economists of senior note and some big firms like Goldman Sachs. They're painting a much more cautious picture.
How cautious are we talking?
Goldman Sachs is actually predicting a 60% chance of a recession. That's a pretty stark difference from the everything's fine message coming from the White House.
60%.
Mm.
So, what's behind that gloomy outlook? What are they seeing that the White House isn't?
Well, while the report doesn't go into all the specifics of Goldman's analysis, it's pretty clear that they and a lot of other economists are worried about the impact of this trade war on things like trade volumes, corporate earnings, and just the overall uncertainty that makes businesses hesitant to invest.
Yeah, that makes sense. When things are unpredictable, people hold back. Okay, so remember that crazy Dow Jones chart we were talking about before, the one with the green spike and the big drop? Let's break that down a little bit more. What's that chart really telling us?
Okay, so that green spike, that was the market going crazy over that rumor about a potential pause in tariffs. It just shows how much power even unfounded news has on investor behavior. People were so hungry for good news that they jumped on it without even knowing if it was true. And then, of course, it all came crashing down once the rumor was debunked. So it's a market that's super reactive, maybe even fragile right now.
Yeah, and that crash happened right before Trump announced that he was going to actually increase tariffs on China by 50%.
Talk about whiplash. One minute there's a glimmer of hope. The next minute it's even worse than before.
So no clear strategy then, just reacting.
That's what the report seems to be suggesting. It even mentions how some of Trump's advisors seem to be talking past each other. There's even a visual in the report, an advisor with his head in his hands, like he can't believe what's happening.
Yeah, not a good look. And this whole thing about Trump inheriting a bad economy, the report really goes after that claim, doesn't it?
It does. The report calls out some administration officials, specifically Stephen Miller, for saying that the tariffs are necessary because Trump inherited a recession or near depression.
Ah.
But the report says that's completely false.
So what was the actual state of the economy when Trump took office?
Well, according to the report, the economy was doing pretty well. They describe it as being in fine fettle. Inflation was going down, the job market was strong, there was decent economic growth, unemployment was low, and the markets were at record highs.
So the complete opposite of a recession or depression.
Right. The report doesn't hold back. It calls that narrative outright fabrication and lies.
Wow, strong words.
Yeah, it's a pretty clear indictment of that talking point. You know, the report also brings up an interesting point about the whole Trump approach to trade requiring a leap of faith.
A leap of faith. What does that mean exactly?
It means that if you believe in what Trump is doing, you basically have to ignore what most economists are saying. It's like driving with your eyes closed. You're hoping for the best, but you're also taking a huge risk.
Right, because traditionally, trade wars are seen as a bad thing.
Yeah, and the report also points out that things are different now than they were, say, in the 1980s when some of these ideas about trade were popular. The global economy is way more interconnected now, and the stakes are much higher. So what might have worked back then might be disastrous now.
So even if Trump have a point about some trade practices being unfair, it's the way he's going about it that's the problem.
That's what the report argues. It's not just about having concerns. It's about how you address those concerns. And the way things are being handled now, with sudden tariffs, constant uncertainty, and a lack of a clear strategy, that's what's really hurting businesses and the global economy.
And it's not like there's even a unified message coming from the administration, right?
Mhm.
The report talks about a lot of mixed signals and internal division.
Right. On the one hand, you've got some officials basically saying, just trust Trump, he knows what he's doing, everything will work out in the end.
Yeah.
But then you've got others who are saying, we need to be actively negotiating and trying to mitigate the damage here.
So which is it? Is it trust Trump or negotiate?
Honestly, it's not clear.
Huh.
The report even points out that Trump himself has contradicted himself on this, sometimes saying tariffs are here to stay, and sometimes saying they're just a negotiating tactic. So there's a lot of confusion about what the actual plan is.
Yeah, and that confusion is really hurting businesses. The report talks about how companies are basically paralyzed right now because they can't plan for the future.
Absolutely. They don't know where to invest. They don't know what the rules are going to be next month, next year. The report gives an example of companies that moved their production from China to Vietnam to avoid tariffs. But now they're getting hit with tariffs on goods from Vietnam too. So they're basically stuck. They can't win.
Ouch. Talk about frustrating. And finally, there's the optics of all this. The report points out how the White House seems to be downplaying the whole situation. While the markets are freaking out, Trump is off golfing and celebrating winning some senior club championship. It just seems a little tone deaf.
Yeah, there's definitely a disconnect there. If there was a clear and coherent strategy in place, maybe this behavior wouldn't be so jarring. But when there's so much uncertainty and anxiety, to see the president seemingly unconcerned, it just adds to the sense that things are out of control.
So to wrap things up, it sounds like we're in a pretty volatile and uncertain situation. The markets are reacting strongly to these trade tensions, and there's a real risk of a recession.
Right. And there's a lot of disagreement about the best way forward. The administration's strategy is unclear, there's internal division, and the business community is basically in a holding pattern, waiting to see what happens next.
Well, that's not exactly reassuring, but at least we have a better understanding now of what we're dealing with.
That's the goal, to cut through the noise and get to the core issues.
Exactly. And for everyone listening, here's something to think about. If the markets are reacting this strongly to every little rumor and announcement, what does that tell us about the future of the global economy? Can we really plan for the long term when things are so unpredictable? Something to ponder until our next deep dive.
Definitely something to consider.